I could ask more because this
Yes.
is, this is fascinating to me. As a, I think Azam's work is fantastic. So, so I could go back to this one. Um, in his coverage of El Chapo, what does he think the what does he think the end result of this is? I mean, do the Mexican people support El Chapo? Do they dislike him? I mean, there's a support? I would like to know his take on El Chapo after the 8, 10, 15 years of El Chapo coverage that we've all done.
I might have a controversial perspective on this. I think there's a system in which he is a player, and that he is a colorful and strange and funny little character with very, very, very dark appetites that has fascinated us as media, but that he's irrelevant. What matters is he's gone and another guy rises and the wheels on the bus go round and round, and that doesn't stop. And maybe the next guy's a little bit more cautious about being out in public or about, developing a reputation or being seen. But as far as I'm concerned, the nailing of Chapo, how many times have we done that? US prisons are filled with extradited drug lords that none of us even remember anymore. People who in that era might be like, oh man, he was the biggest deal. And now they're just like collecting dust in some supermax. What doesn't change is the nature of drug demand in the United States and Mexico's station as the DHL of getting said drugs into the United States. And as long as that dynamic exists, new people are going to test the throne. They're going to come up and try and take over, or they're going to work their way through these because the economic opportunity and the lack of rule of law make it such that it's quite an understandable decision in some ways. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe I have a very cynical view of the fascination with Chapo. I think he's a caricature in a larger cartoon, because we begin to take this seriously when we begin to see, like, what are the root causes behind this? What are we doing about it? This kingpin strategy. I mean, I'll leave you with one statistic. Since the beginning of the drug war, which has taken so many hundreds of thousands of lives, there are now today more deaths in the United States and deaths from overdose in Mexico than ever before. If there is a clearer marker of failure, I don't know it. If there's a clearer way to say that this policy is completely bankrupt and doesn't work, I don't know what other metrics you could use to countervail or override what I just said. And I think Chapo is just a drop in an ocean of problematic policy.
We have a couple of other questions that have cropped up. One is
Please.
one is from Bill. Are Guatemala and Nicaragua as rough as Honduras?
It's an interesting question to ask. I mean, if you look at homicide statistics, no. Nicaragua, certainly not. Nicaragua has its own more political problem, but in terms of homicides and violence, it's not even on a par with them. It's not to say that the people who are suffering under Ortega's repression have any less sort of moral empathy, but it's a different dynamic. I think with Guatemala, surprisingly, their homicide rate, and it's a larger country than Honduras, but I don't think the gang activity is quite as pernicious. But I would put that in the same sort of Northern Triangle band of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador is one of the more ultra-violent places in the region.
All right, and Alan is asking how the Mexican government reacts to your reporting of the violence and corruption.
Excellent question.
Yeah, so I'll start with the easy one and go to the harder one. On the violence, honestly, I think they don't even care anymore. That narrative is out there, and if a story manages to break through the cloud of indifference, it only does so in the United States and among readers. The government's like, yeah, we know, look at the numbers, everybody knows this is a violent place and it's really violent. And somehow this current president has weathered the storm of that pressure with a remarkable degree of agility and indifference. When it comes to corruption, that's a totally different question. every time I've done something, it's been intense and there's been a lot of backlash. And like across these two administrations, which are the only ones that I know, during the Peña Nieto administration, during Pegasus, it was intense. Every time one of those stories came out, it would dominate the local news cycle for a week. And there'd be interviews. And one of the things that I think I didn't mention to you before, one of the tactics I took to kind of avoid, as you said before, you didn't like to be posted on Facebook, is I didn't do television interviews. We decided back in 2017 with the heat and scrutiny and the waves that those stories were making, that better not to like present an updated version of myself for anyone interested to know what I looked like to see. And so I did radio interviews, but I opted not to do television or in-person, kind of media stuff. And it was rough. I mean, you talk about sleepless nights. I have a colleague who's here now, and she did brilliant work on the business desk covering corporate, fiascos. And one of the things she was noting is that here you never really get that final confirmation. In some worlds you can call the government and say, look, I got this, I know this, please cry uncle and just let me know if I got something wrong. And they'll play ball. Wall Street will play ball, corporate America will play ball, even the USG will play ball sometimes. Not in Mexico. I would send them questions and they would send me back some Baroque, incomprehensible response written in 18th century Spanish that nobody could squeeze an answer out of. And so you really had to know you were right because they were waiting for it, waiting for that moment for you to get a single little thing wrong, never mind the big thing. And that is anxiety inducing. They also wound up sending Pegasus to my phone. And like an idiot, I downloaded it because it was before I'd done any of the reporting on Pegasus. And I remember I had drinks with someone one night. And as we were sitting there, this person was very close to the government. She said, the funny thing about you is you don't do anything bad. You don't do anything really bad. You don't have any crazy vices. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then it clicked later. Perhaps they'd gone through all of my emails and personal photos and messages and contacts using this incredibly sophisticated spyware, looking for some way to kind of gain leverage and didn't find any. I mean, maybe that's completely fictitious, but that's how I took it. And so during that, this is a long-winded answer, so I apologize. But during that era, there was a lot of scrutiny, but the government would make this big announcement like, oh, we're gonna launch an investigation and get to the bottom of this. And then they would do this very Mexican thing where they didn't do anything, but they would continue to produce a paper trail showing they were doing something. Or they would pass a new law, but nothing actually happened. During the AMLO government, I found it much more fierce and much more attack oriented. I did a story in May that took me a while to pull together about how the Mexican government was hiding the real death toll in Mexico City from COVID. And in actuality, based on leaked documents that I received, the death toll was 3 times higher. And in the immediate aftermath, it felt like the entire population was divided. Half of the country was like, we knew it, thank God someone proved it. And the other half was like, who is this idiot? Why is he lying about our president? Where's the evidence? You used anonymous sources. And the government itself, AMLO went on, in his Mañanera and was like, oh, little ethics, no one really pays attention to the times. They're a neoliberal organization. And, that became part of the narrative. And then 2 days later, the mayor of the city acknowledged the story was right and set up a committee to actually review the numbers. And they actually started to review the numbers. So whereas the Peña Nieto thing was more subdued and promissory, like we're gonna really do something about this, and they did nothing. The AMLO's government was much more centered on attacks and some of his supporters rather racist and aggressive attacks. But then actually they did something about it. They changed the way they started calculating some of these numbers and became much more sensitive about how they published them. So it was there's a dichotomy, but yeah, I guess none of them have handled it well.
We are once again at the end of our question queue.
Sounds good. Anything you need from me?
Well, I think this seems like a natural ending point. Thank you both so much. You ask excellent questions, Will, and it was extremely interesting to hear more details about how you actually do all of your work, Azam. And we look forward to reading.
Thanks for
more.
having me. And Bill, it's a pleasure to talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very
everyone.
good. Thank you.